LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the August 19th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out the weekend's 13 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. The political comedy sources tonight will be Bill Maher's monologue from Friday night, which actually is kind of like a week behind, kind of like it was last week, so it's mostly about Omarosa. But I actually have a couple news clips from Rudy Giuliani that I think are also political comedy. You may remember last week, and this is the title of my video, Trump versus Truth. That's the topic I'll be covering. The rest of the clips, like these two clips, teaser clips I'm about to play you, come from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. You'll also notice that down in the video description, I've put some links where you can contribute to my broadcast. For example, last week's broadcast, as I surmised might occur, you can see here from my video manager, not suitable for most advertisers, confirmed my manual review. And the only reason I can think of is because the word racism is in the title. That's last week's show. And it's kind of unfair because I, like almost all the shows I watch that have any sort of current event content, have been talking about Trump and racism during the last week, and they all have ads on them, like, you know, The Daily Show, and of course all the news shows on MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, ABC, CBS, the big five corporate outlets. They're all running shows about Trump and racism. Lots more people are saying Trump is racist, which is what I talked about last week, but apparently having the word racism in the title just can't get past the YouTube algorithm. So I appreciate my Patreons who support me every week. I got a PayPal contribution. There's a link to that down in the video description. And I saw even before I started the show, I had a $2 Super Chat contribution. So that also helps. I had a bunch of Super Chat contributions last week, which help me feel not so bad about the fact that YouTube won't let me talk about Trump and racism. But that's not the topic this week. This week it's whether it's Trump versus truth or truth does not equal truth. And it's because Rudy Giuliani this week kind of answered the question that I asked in the 3-second teaser at the beginning of last week's show. This is the humorous teaser from CNN State of the Union, Jake Tapper's interview with Rudy Giuliani last week that I thought was amusing. Here's what he said.
I mean, why would I say something that isn't true?
So, and the answer to the question, why would he say something that isn't true? Well, that's over in the 2-second teaser clip from the longer clip. This is a teaser from the longer clip I'll show from NBC's Meet the Press, where Rudy Giuliani actually says this.
No, it isn't truth. Truth isn't truth.
Wait, sorry, I kind of missed that.
No, it isn't truth. Truth isn't truth.
Truth isn't truth. There, I played it for you twice because I missed it the first time. So the answer to why would he say something that isn't true? Well, truth isn't truth. And, you know, as someone who does this weekly clip roundup in front of this mug of Mr. Spock here, I couldn't help thinking of the original Star Trek series episode I, Mud, where the Star Trek crew, and especially Mr. Spock, has to come up with ways of tricking these logical androids into paradoxical loops, and that the truth is not the truth. That sounds like something that might have come up in that episode. I couldn't help thinking that, but I will be covering that more, and also the attack on the truth from the Trump administration with this pulling of the security clearance from John Brennan, the former CIA director, who is, I'm not a big fan of his, which I'll talk about later. And so those are the two big parts of the Trump topic, the Rudy Giuliani clips, and then the John Brennan related clips, and of course all the news summaries. But before I get to that, I promised the Bill Maher clip where in his monologue on Friday on HBO's Real Time, Bill Maher talked about Again, Trump not being truthful, but this was with an excerpt or a tape that Omarosa took of Donald Trump that came out after my show last week. So I guess it was too late for my Sunday show, but it still shows that Bill Maher's monologue is kind of a week behind again this week, talking about Omarosa. Although I will show in the news summaries that they kind of talk about how this whole John Brennan thing was meant to distract us from the Omarosa story. But anyway, here's Bill Maher talking for 80 seconds in his monologue. You can watch the whole monologue free on YouTube on the Real-Time channel at a link I put in the video description. Here's the 80 seconds I took that we'll discuss after we watch it together over here.
And we have to hear it. Omarosa has tapes. Did you hear the one? Oh, God. Did you hear the one where she's playing, where she's talking to Trump after she got fired and telling him about it? Play that tape.
General Kelly came to me and said that you guys wanted me to leave.
No, nobody even told me about it. Nobody.
Wow.
You know, they run a big operation, but I didn't know it. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Aside from everything else, what a pussy piece of shit he is. Can't even... Yeah. I didn't know it. They run a big operation here. Boy, if I ever find this president of the United States guy, I'm gonna find out what he... And so vain, she says in the book that he immediately put in, when he became president, a tanning bed that he uses every day. Oh, big mix-up one morning. Rudy Giuliani was getting into his coffin. And Trump was getting out of the tanning bed, and luckily Melania had just come out of her sensory deprivation tank, so she...
So it was mostly about Omarosa again, and although there was that Rudy Giuliani vampire joke, although if you look at the thumbnail of this video, I have like a shot of Rudy Giuliani where you can see his teeth, and I don't think they're quite sharp enough for him to be a vampire. But I don't know, you can go back and look at the thumbnail for this video and decide for yourself. He does kind of look vampirish otherwise, but anyway... Like I said, that concentrated on Omarosa from last week, and you may remember last week I didn't even show the NBC Meet the Press news summary because it was all concentrated on Omarosa, and I criticized them for concentrating on Omarosa. Well, this week it's not that. It's actually concentrating on, first, you'll see by the end of this that NBC reports on the Washington Post story that the John Brennan national security clearance revocation was actually done at the end of July and was like held back until they wanted to stop an unfavorable news cycle, which is the Omarosa news. That's what I was talking about before in terms of how Trump is actually trying to distract from Omarosa by taking John Brennan's security clearance. But there was also a couple other important stories. The Meet the Press news summary is the best one. It's the longest one. It includes the whole enemies list angle on what's happening with John Brennan. It talks about the breaking Don McGahn story, the White House counsel, who apparently has testified for like 30 hours in front of Robert Mueller's grand jury, or to Robert Mueller. And so it's all included in this 4-minute, 22-second news summary from NBC's Meet the Press this morning. I will discuss with you after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning. No ordinary August. We got a big show for you today. John Brennan and Rudy Giuliani, and we're going to get to both of them in a moment. It was almost a half century ago that we first learned of President Richard Nixon's enemies list. The list included people like journalist Daniel Schorr, liberal activist Allard Lowenstein, Democratic Congressman John Conyers, even actor Paul Newman. And it grew over time. Then White House counsel John Dean wrote in a White House memo that the administration sought to use incumbency to deal with its opponents. Stated a bit more bluntly, Dean wrote in this White House memo before he turned, how we can use the available federal machinery to screw our political opponents. Dean, of course, eventually testified against his president. The Nixon-Watergate era enemies list gained renewed relevance this week when President Trump revoked the security clearance of former CIA Director John Brennan, and then threatened to do the same to many more of the president's highest-profile critics. Adding to the Watergate parallels, yesterday we learned that President Trump's White House counsel Don McGahn has been cooperating fully with Robert Mueller's investigation. That was, of course, the president's legal strategy at one time, not anymore. And to complete the Watergate circle, yesterday John Dean, yes, that John Dean tweeted, McGahn is doing right. On Friday night, the Washington Post reported the White House has already drafted documents to punish Mr. Trump's opponents that we listed above, and that White House officials have discussed timing the release of the documents, quote, as a distraction during unfavorable news cycles. That certainly seemed to be the goal this week, as the White House broke the Brennan news at the height of one of those, quote, unfavorable news cycles.
They should be looking at all these FBI guys who got fired and demoted. It's a really weird, it's not us.
President Trump reportedly furious about the nonstop coverage of former senior staffer Omarosa Manigault Newman.
What Mr. Trump does will be brought to light.
Tried to change the subject, testing the waters on how far he can go to personally intervene in the Russia investigation and to punish his critics.
I like taking on voices like that. I've never respected him.
On Wednesday, Mr. Trump told the Wall Street Journal he stripped former CIA Director Brennan's clearance because of the investigation. Quote, I call it the rigged witch hunt. It is a sham, and these people led it. So I think it's something that had to be done.
This is an egregious act that flies in the face of traditional practice, as well as common sense, as well as national security.
Now, with his former campaign chairman on trial for bank and tax fraud, the president is threatening to do the same to 9 other critics, including a current member of his Justice Department.
I think Bruce Orr is a disgrace. I suspect I'll be taking it away very quickly.
By targeting Orr, the president is attacking a mid-level civil servant who needs a clearance to do his job and is prohibited from fighting back. The intelligence community is firing back. After Brennan's clearance was revoked, the commander of the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, retired Admiral William McRaven, criticized the president's McCarthy-era tactics. And nearly 75 former intelligence officials have shown support for Brennan, calling Mr. Trump's action an attempt to stifle free speech. But so far, just a handful of Republicans on Capitol Hill have criticized the president's tactics.
I thought it was just kind of a banana republic kind of thing.
Most have even defended the tactics.
Mr. Brennan has gone way over the line in my view, and I think restricting his clearance, pulling his clearance makes sense to me.
It was about time that he did take away that.
I think I called him a butthead, and I meant it.
And Mr. Trump's attacks on the Justice Department and intelligence community are only escalating. Now some officials worry that Special Counsel Robert Mueller and his team could be next.
What the president is doing in part is sending a menacing signal to the prosecutors and the investigators on the Mueller team that if they continue their investigation, that their security clearance, which they need in order to do their job, is being put in jeopardy.
And joining me now is the former director of the CIA, John Brennan. He's also an NBC News national security and intelligence.
That's right. John Brennan now works for NBC, and I think that like I said, that was the best news summary, and I think it gave you all the important information on these stories that you need. And the next news summaries I'm going to show all are lesser in comparison to the news summary I just showed you. But one big criticism I have of not just NBC, but all the corporate news media, and maybe even some people on the left, I guess, even though I'm LiberalViewer, is the way they're kind of lionizing John Brennan. Like I said earlier in the introduction to the show, I am not a big fan of John Brennan. And by the way, if you follow me on Twitter, you would see that when this whole thing happened, I retweeted a tweet from Hina Shamsi, who's the ACLU's National Security Project Director. And by the way, you should follow me on Twitter because, like just about everyone on Twitter, I think I just lost like 10% of my followers in the great Twitter purge. It has something to do with bots and fake accounts, or I don't know. But so it's just twitter.com/liberalviewer. And if you followed me on Twitter, you would see that I retweeted this a couple days ago from Hina Shamsi. 2 true things. John Brennan does not equal a hero. We at ACLU unsparingly criticize his defense of CIA torture and his role in unlawful lethal strikes abroad. But 2, the First Amendment doesn't allow Trump to Brennan's security clearance to punish political criticism. So you can hold two different ideas in your head at the same time at the ACLU and hopefully outside the ACLU. Both those things are true. You can not be a fan of John Brennan, but you can also think that revoking his security clearance for criticizing Trump is a violation of the First Amendment. And if you're wondering about the First Amendment, that's a First Amendment to the Constitution. This is my ACLU Constitution. When maybe later I'll tell you how you can get your own copy of that by being my patron or giving me a PayPal donation of $10 or more. But the thing I wanted to talk about next is comparing these next news summaries to that NBC Meet the Press news summary, which gave all this information. It included, you saw the Washington Post story about how the John Brennan security clearance revocation was something they were saving up until the Omarosa news cycle, or till some unfavorable news cycle. And that is actually something that's in the next news summary as well. This is the ABC, actually that part of it isn't in the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary. I had some problems this morning, by the way. Xfinity Comcast was doing maintenance on my cable and my internet, and you'll see there's a little glitch in this news summary from ABC's This Week. It's not too bad. You can still understand what George Stephanopoulos is saying, but he talks about how it's another week and another norm has been broken, which is the revocation of security clearances and the backlash, and that the intelligence services appear to be at war with the Trump administration. Hopefully I'll remember to tell you something about the breaking of norms and another edited, produced video I've been thinking of making. But first we'll watch the 1 minute 6 second news summary from George Stephanopoulos on This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning over here.
Week, another norm shattered. Intelligence officials, even former CIA directors, have lost their security clearances before when they broke the rules or broke the law. What happened this week is brand new. The first time a president has personally revoked the security clearance of a former official, not for mishandling classified information, there's no evidence of that, but for speaking out against the president. And as the president told the Wall Street Journal, it was retaliation for John Brennan's involvement with the Russia investigation at the CIA. I call it the rigged witch hunt, and these people led it, said Trump. So I think it's something that had to be done. President Trump is now threatening to take action against others he blames for the Russia investigation. And his unprecedented actions have drawn an unprecedented response from dozens of former intelligence officials, including CIA directors dating back to the Reagan administration. It's a remarkable rebuke that raises a serious question. What does it mean for national security when the intelligence community and the commander-in-chief appear to be at war? Our chief global affairs anchor, Martha Raddatz, is in Jerusalem this morning, where she discussed this issue and much.
And I will actually have a clip of Martha Raddatz's interview with National Security Advisor John Bolton, where I think there's quite a bit lacking in his answer as to how it is that John Brennan has, abused his security clearance so that it should be revoked. And I'll have several clips on that after the Rudy Giuliani clips, but I have a few more news summaries to get to. I have the CNN one, the Fox News one, and then the CBS one, so we can compare them all pretty much, all the corporate news outlets. And the next one is from CNN's State of the Union, where, I don't know, I think Jake Tapper may be starting the program with a Queen reference, because the State of the Union this week is Under Pressure, which, I don't know, when I hear that, I think of a Queen song. And all the other information, important information, is also in this news summary. It's a little bit longer than the ABC news summary. It's 1 minute and 23 seconds, and it talks about the John Brennan security clearance revocation, and it talks about the Washington Post story about the 30 hours of Don McGahn testimony to Robert Mueller, and I will discuss it with you after we watch those 83 seconds together from CNN this morning over here.
Hello, I'm Dick Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is under pressure. President Trump feeling the heat from a Russia investigation that just will not go away, railing on Twitter this morning that the special counsel is worse than the infamous Senator Joseph McCarthy, the man behind the Red Scare in the 1950s. Trump claiming he has nothing to hide. This in response to a stunning new New York Times report that White House counsel Don McGahn has spent 30 hours over 9 months talking to Robert Mueller, the special counsel, the White House lawyer, effectively a cooperating witness in the investigation of President Trump. This as the president continues his attack on former CIA Director John Brennan after the president's disdain for the Russia investigation drove him to take away Brennan's security clearance, tweeting Saturday, quote, "Brennan has become nothing less than a loudmouth partisan political hack who cannot be trusted with the secrets to our country." The president now putting more of the nation's top former intelligence and national security leaders on notice that they might be next. Unprecedented moves that drew a stern rebuke from dozens of the nation's highest former intelligence officials who have served both Democratic and Republican presidents. Here with me to talk about this all, former Department of Homeland Security and counterterrorism advisor to President Obama, Lisa Monaco, former Director of National Intelligence General James Clapper, and former CIA and NSA Director General Michael Hayden. More than a century of combined.
So, yeah, Jake Tapper there said many laudatory things about, those three people have more than a century of intelligence experience. And the woman I didn't really recognize, but James Clapper and Michael Hayden, I could say some of the, kind of similar to what Hina Shamsi said about John Brennan. They are, John Brennan especially on torture and the drone assassinations, but Michael Hayden and especially James Clapper, he's the one who rubbed his head and said to Ron Wyden in the famous pre-Snowden Senate testimony, we're not collecting information on millions of Americans. And then if you read the Glenn Greenwald book right here, No Place to Hide, right above the Spock mug, No Place to Hide, Glenn Greenwald talks all about the Edward Snowden revelations and how James Clapper was basically lied to the Senate, which of course never prosecuted for, and now he's like a deep state corporate media pundit along with Michael Hayden and whatever. I like reading what Glenn Greenwald has to say because I think he's like an important skeptic from the left on the whole Russia collusion story, although I think something is going to come out of the Russia collusion story, as I'll talk about a little bit later when I show a clip of Chuck Todd arguing about whether there's evidence of collusion with Rudy Giuliani. But before I get to that, I have to show two more news summary clips. The first one is from Fox News Sunday. In the teaser intro from Fox News Sunday, where they discussed the news stories they were going to talk about, they talked about the revocation of the security clearance from John Brennan, and then how great the economy's doing, which they spent at least a majority of the show on how great the economy's doing, talking to Mulvaney, the Office of Management and Budget, the budget director for Donald Trump's administration. But they did at least have one more confrontational questioning on this topic with Republican Senator Ron Johnson that from Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace that I'll show a little later. But first I want to show how Fox News Sunday talked about the same news that you saw from the previous three news summaries. I think this is spun in a much more pro-Trump way, as I will discuss with you after we watch it's just a 37-second news summary from Chris Wallace this morning over here.
Again from Fox News in Washington. If President Trump wanted to change the subject from Omarosa this week, he certainly did. He pulled the security clearance of former CIA Director John Brennan and is reviewing the status of 9 other current and former officials. Former top intelligence figures going back to the Reagan administration reacted with fury. In a few minutes, we'll discuss whether the president is protecting the nation's secrets or playing politics with the head of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, Ron Johnson. But first, Admiral Mike Mullen, former chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under
Mike Mullen, another member of the deep state. It seems like all the shows have their member of the deep state to come and talk about how they're disgusted, or at least how they oppose what Donald Trump has done to John Brennan. Although I'm not going to show you any clips of Admiral Mullen there, although I think he was one of the most sanguine about what the Trump administration did with John Brennan. He thought that John Brennan might have gone too far. And that's what you've been seeing on Fox News for the last couple days. That, well, it is like a violation of a norm. And I never told you what my edited, produced video about norms, but maybe I'll save that for another time. But because it's been a while. But now I'm getting myself distracted. The Fox News Sunday clip, I think, did not have a lot of the information about, Don McGahn, although that came up later in the Fox News Sunday program. And you saw how Chris Wallace started that clip by saying, if Donald Trump wanted to distract from the Omarosa story, then bringing up this whole John Brennan thing would have been a good way to do it. And that's actually what the Washington Post reported, which Chris Wallace didn't say at the beginning of that last clip, although he does actually ask Senator Ron Johnson about it later. No, that's not the next clip. That's like clip number 12, and I'm about to show you clip number 8, which is the final news summary, CBS's Face the Nation. Margaret Brennan, in this clip, she... I've been showing you all these deep state people, Admiral Mullen in that last clip, and then there was Michael Hayden, and there was James Clapper, and then, of course, John Brennan, who is the deep state person who is... and by the way, if you really want to know what the deep state means, again, you have to look at Glenn Greenwald's definition, which is much better than the Fox News right-wing conservative definition, because a lot of the deep state actually is conservative. That's what's kind of ridiculous about the Trump administration incarnation of the deep state. But this next CBS Face the Nation clip seems to almost be criticizing the rest of the corporate media for having all their deep state people on to talk about John Brennan, and then you'll see at the very end they have their own deep state person, Leon Panetta. And I'm not going to show any clips of Leon Panetta either. I haven't shown any of these deep state people clips who are, they're former deep state people. Now they're like pundits. And anyway, here's Margaret Brennan, 30 seconds, summarizing the deep state onslaught into the corporate media over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. The president's efforts to silence his critics in the intelligence community has not discouraged them from demonstrating the right to free speech. As former CIA Director John Brennan, former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, and former CIA Director Mike Hayden all appeared this morning in their roles as network contributors. We spoke earlier with former CIA Director Leon Panetta and asked him why he opposed the president's action.
Security clearances are...
Before I showed that clip, did I say the phrase deep state too many times? No, I didn't say it enough times. Anyway, that is actually the last of the news summaries. And now come the two incredible Rudy Giuliani clips that I mentioned earlier. The first one is not the truth is not truth clip. That's going to be you'll have to wait for that one. That's the second clip. But the first clip actually is in some ways almost more incredible because it has to do with the Trump Tower, the June 9th, 2016 Trump Tower meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner, and then this Kremlin lawyer. You'll hear... It took me a few times to listen to what Chuck Todd is saying in this clip. I thought for a minute he said criminal lawyer, but it's Natalia Veselnitskaya is the Kremlin lawyer. And you'll see Rudy Giuliani says, oh, she's not a Russian government lawyer. She's just like some Russian. She has a Russian name. All they knew is she had a Russian name, which is bogus because they got this email saying she was a Kremlin, a state prosecutor, a Russian prosecutor, associated lawyer. And it doesn't matter if you look down in the video description, you'll see as usual for many, many weeks, I put a link to various federal statutes, including 52 U.S. Code Section 30,121, which makes contributions and donations by foreign nationals a federal crime. And foreign nationals it makes it a crime for foreign nationals to donate, not foreign governments. All they have to be is a foreign national, not a permanent resident like a green card holder in the United States. But you'd never know it from listening to Rudy Giuliani, also admitting the same thing that Donald Trump admitted 2 weeks ago, that the whole Trump Tower meeting on June 9th, 2016 was about getting dirt on Hillary Clinton. That was the intent of the meeting, which is a violation of the statute I just talked about, getting something of value from a foreign national. But you can see Rudy Giuliani dishonestly try to squirm out of that with good questioning and follow-up from Chuck Todd on Meet the Press this morning over here.
They had some kind of evidence that there was collusion or there was obstruction. Don't you think it had been leaked? I mean, they leak everything else.
Let's talk with collusion. I mean, the Trump Tower meeting itself is at least evidence of you better investigate. How is it not?
Well, because the meeting was originally for the purpose of getting information about Clinton. The meeting turned into a meeting.
Which in itself, it's attempted collusion. I understand.
No, it's
you
not.
Just said it. The meeting was intended to get dirt on Hillary Clinton from a Kremlin lawyer.
No.
That was the intention of the meeting. You just said it.
That was the original intention of the meeting. It turned out to be a meeting about another subject, and it was not pursued at all. And, of course, any meeting with regard to getting information on your opponent is something any candidate's staff would take. If someone said, I have information about your opponent, you would take that meeting. If it happens to be
from the
person
Russian
with
government?
a Russian... She didn't represent the Russian government. She's a private citizen. I don't even know if they knew she was Russian at the time. All they had was her name.
They knew she was Russian. I think they knew she was Russian, but
well, they knew it when they met with her, not when they set up the meeting. You told me, you asked me, did they show an intention to do anything with Russians? Well, all they knew is that a woman with a Russian name wanted to meet with them. They didn't know she was a representative of the Russian government, and indeed, she's not a representative of the Russian government. So this is much ado about nothing. Plus, the President of the United States wasn't at that meeting. He didn't know about that meeting. He found out about it after. And by the time he found out about it, it was nothing.
Let me ask you this. Let me just go back to the core.
If this is their case for collusion, good luck, Mueller.
Let me go back to the core.
So, I don't know. For some reason, I don't necessarily trust what Rudy Giuliani's saying there at the end about Trump didn't know about it beforehand and nothing came of it. And you may wonder, why do I not believe that? As Rudy Giuliani might say.
I mean, why would I say something that isn't true?
But I think we all know the answer to that. It's because of the second teaser clip I showed you.
No, it isn't truth. Truth isn't truth.
And actually, that teaser clip is a teaser for the next clip I'm going to show you in just a minute. But I also wanted to point out about that whole... I mean, I pretty much explained before I showed that clip from Rudy Giuliani that the argument about whether it was the Russian government is totally immaterial to whether they violated that federal statute that I put down in the video description, the contributions and donations by foreign nationals. Just has to be a foreign national, doesn't have to be the Russian government. And then, of course, in the email that has already been leaked by Donald Trump Jr. himself, they said it was that Natalia Veselnitskaya was a representative of the Crown prosecutor or something like that is the term used in the email. And so obviously not just someone with a Russian name, but that was a bogus clip. But not quite as bogus as the next clip where the truth is not truth phrase that's going to become a meme, according to Chuck Todd in this next clip. But it actually starts with the reference to the perjury trap. you'll see Rudy Giuliani claiming that Mueller's trying to get Donald Trump into a perjury trap, which gives me a brief opportunity to tell you down in the video description, this is my edited, produced video I made last week. Trump perjury trap claim is bogus. This is the thumbnail, and I put a link down to it. It's the first link that's down in the video description, and you'll see it's so far gotten less views than my Sunday clip roundups. The Sunday clip roundup takes all day on Sunday. That perjury trap video, even though it's that perjury trap video took about twice as long. I mean, it basically 2 days worth of work. The ad revenue on it is a few dollars, and I think I got one PayPal contribution for $5 that it didn't specifically say it came from making that video, but I think so. And then I did get one person down in Patreon. You can become a patron on Patreon. Well, one person actually pledged $5 a month based on my having made that edited produced video, and I'm hoping to do that more often. But it's really not so much about the revenue. It's I had something I wanted to say that I didn't think anyone in the media was saying, which was, what does the legal term perjury trap mean, and how is it totally contradict what Trump's lawyers like Rudy Giuliani and Jay Sekulow have been saying about the perjury trap? Well, that's something I wanted to say that I haven't seen explained in the corporate news media, and that's why I made this video, and you can watch it at a link down in the video description. If you want me to make more of those, you can just let me know that you like that I spent the time making that 9-minute video, like 2 days, and hopefully when I have something I want to say that I don't think the corporate media is saying, then I'll make these edited, produced videos more often, sometime in between the Sundays, and whether they get the views or make revenue, that's kind of I guess a secondary consideration, as long as my viewers like them and I like making them. So that's what I wanted to say about the perjury trap thing. But the perjury trap, like I said, is sort of an introduction to this clip. This kind of legendary or legend in the making clip that goes along with the alternative facts and facts change, or whatever it was Jay Sekulow said a couple weeks ago. Well, this is truth is not truth, when Rudy Giuliani is trying to explain to Chuck Todd why Donald Trump shouldn't testify to Robert Mueller. And after I show this clip, I will also explain, as a former criminal defense attorney, how his argument that, one person says one thing, the other person says the other thing, you're such a genius, tell me what the truth is, and I will explain why that's kind of a fallacy after we watch this probably best clip of the week from Rudy Giuliani. It's a minute 47 seconds over here.
Look, I'm not going to be rushed into having him testify so that he gets trapped into perjury. And when you tell me that, he should testify because he's going to tell the truth and he shouldn't worry, well, that's so silly, because it's somebody's version of the truth, not the truth. He didn't have a conversation.
Truth is truth. I don't mean to go like...
No, it isn't truth. Truth isn't truth. The President of the United States says, I didn't...
Truth isn't truth. Mr. Maher, do you realize what...
No.
This is going to become a bad meme.
Don't do this to me.
Don't do truth isn't truth to me.
Donald Trump says, I didn't talk about Flynn with Comey. Comey says you did talk about it. So tell me what the truth is.
Don McGahn might know.
If you're such a genius, Don McGahn doesn't know. If that's the situation,
okay.
They have two pieces of evidence. Trump says, I didn't tell him, and the other guy says that he did say it. Which is the truth? And maybe you know, right, because you're
under
a genius.
Two people, no, you're right. I don't read minds on that front. Let me ask you this final question.
No, let me finish. We have a credibility gap between the two of them. You got to select one or the other. Now, who do you think Mueller's going to select? One of his best friends, Comey, or the president, who he has been carrying on a completely wild, crazy, unorthodox investigation?
Is it possible he makes a conclusion based on who's been more truthful over the years?
It's possible that he'll make the conclusion on which of the two statements is more logical, which of the two statements has more common sense. Yeah, it's possible he can do that. But no, you can't bring into question prior conduct. You're not even allowed to do that at a trial.
All right, one final question. You said if Mueller...
No, actually, the last thing that Rudy Giuliani said there, and that's why Chuck Todd's last follow-up wasn't all that insightful, because what Rudy Giuliani said about not being allowed to bring in prior bad conduct in a trial, that's true. You're not allowed to, put in evidence that someone lied before, so they must be lying now. That's supposedly, according to the rules of evidence, generally considered more prejudicial than probative, and evidence was actually one of my specialties as a criminal defense attorney, and I actually did well in my evidence class and then my advanced evidence class in law school, so I was kind of like pretty good at the rules of evidence, and I can tell you that prior bad acts, what Rudy Giuliani was talking about in the very end of that clip, that makes sense, but the rest of it, the truth is not truth, and one person says one thing and another person says another thing. You're a genius, you tell me what's the truth. Well, there is a truth there, and the jury's supposed to do their best to find a truth based on what the burden of proof is. Generally in a criminal trial, they're supposed to decide beyond a reasonable doubt. So if it's like a conflict between what James Comey says and Donald Trump says, and they both seem credible, and the jury's supposed to listen to their testimony, or the grand jury in the case of Robert Mueller trying to get an indictment, which he may or may not be trying to do for Donald Trump, but any type of juror is supposed to be able to listen to the testimony, and that's why people have to testify in person, and based on their demeanor, they're supposed to judge their credibility, and they can, if there are a lot of cases that are, he said, she said, and both, or he said, or whatever, so that there are two conflicting witnesses and the jury decides that they believe one person over another, but that then they have to believe them beyond a reasonable doubt. But that also is not completely applicable, because in this case we're talking about impeachment and removal. So in this case, we're really talking about the House of Representatives. 51% of them, if you read your Constitution here, the impeachment power, which is kind of like an indictment, a charge against the president. If you remember what happened to Clinton, he was impeached but not removed. So the House of Representatives impeaches. They say that by 51% of them, they think that he's committed perjury, or he's committed obstruction of justice, or conspiracy to commit a fraud against the United States, another crime I put down in the video description if you're interested in that. But that would take 51% of the House of Representatives. But then it's kind of like the beyond a reasonable doubt standard in the criminal trial I was talking about. It takes 2/3 of the Senate to remove the president. If you look at your Constitution, that's 67 senators. That includes quite a number of Republicans. So that's how you decide the credibility gap. It would have to be Robert Mueller's report would have to convince all the angry Democrats in the House of Representatives, all the angry Democrats and moderate Democrats in the Senate, plus a bunch of Republicans. So that's how you resolve the he said, she said conflict of testimony. And so that was another especially bogus part of Rudy Giuliani's argument there, beyond just saying truth is not truth, because there really is a truth, and it's up to the jurors or the members of the House and Senate in the case of impeachment and removal to judge the credibility of the witnesses and come to some conclusion based on what the burden of proof is. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say about that. And now I want to show a John Bolton clip. This is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz interviewed John Bolton about, and these next few clips the next two clips are about the revocation of John Brennan's national security clearance. And the most important one is from John Bolton, because he's the national security advisor. And you'll see when he's talking to Martha Raddatz in this next clip, he can't explain in any way how John Brennan has used classified material improperly, which would be the real reason to revoke his security clearance. Instead, you'll see at the beginning of this, he talks about how he is politicizing intelligence, and there should be a divide between politics and policy, which is what he says at the end of this clip, which is the height of irony for John Bolton, who was one of those people who helped politicize the intelligence before the invasion of Iraq under George W. Bush. So he's like, this is so much the pot calling the kettle black in terms of politicizing intelligence. And then there's this weird reference to how after he left the Bush administration, some unnamed State Department official also tried to revoke his security clearance. And from what I understand, his security clearance was never revoked, but briefly the security clearance for his mustache was revoked. No, that's just a joke. I apologize for that joke, but here's John Bolton and his mustache talking to Martha Raddatz over here.
Behavior while he was at the CIA. It was my view at the time that he and others in the Obama administration were politicizing intelligence. I think that's a very dangerous thing to do, and I think especially for senior intelligence officials, career intelligence officials who come out of the government, to keep that wall of separation between intelligence and policy. And I don't think Brennan has followed that. And, whether he actually used classified information, I think people will be able to determine. But I think that's a serious problem.
Are there any specific examples that you think he used classified intelligence?
No, but I think there is
there
is a line, and somebody can cross it. I know from my own experience in the Bush administration after I left. I was accused by a senior State Department official of criticizing the administration's policy on North Korea and using classified information. And it happened, he was half right. I was criticizing the Bush administration, but I was not using classified information. Had I been, it would have been a different story.
I assume that John Brennan says the same thing, that he didn't use classified information. Would you have been fine if President Obama had revoked your security clearance for criticizing him, which you did frequently?
No, because I didn't use classified information there either. I say there's a line, and I think it's clear some people can cross it.
But let me be clear here. You're not sure whether John Brennan used classified information. You have no specific examples.
In terms of what he said, since he left, I think a number of people have commented that he couldn't be in the position he's in of criticizing President Trump and his so-called collusion with Russia unless he did use classified information. But I don't know the specifics. What I do know is when he was director of the CIA, I was very troubled by his conduct, by statements he made in public, and by what I thought was his politicization of the intelligence community.
So the line to you for people who should have their security clearance revoked is if they use classified information, but you're not really sure whether he did.
If there's any kind of misconduct, I think there are lots of grounds to have your security clearance revoked for behavior that calls into question your ability to hold the material in confidence.
Okay, just a couple more on this. The criticism of this move has been very widespread. CIA directors Bob Gates, George Tenet, Michael Hayden, all of whom served under Republican presidents, expressing outrage. They called it an inappropriate attempt to stifle free speech based on political views, writing that this action is quite clearly a signal to other former and current officials. Are those concerns valid?
Well, look, as I said a moment ago, I've been through this myself. And had the senior State Department official, whose name I'll let go for now, persisted and tried to get my clearance pulled because I had been critical of his performance and others, yes, I would have objected to it. I don't think political disagreement alone is sufficient. But I think in the case, especially of a senior intelligence community official who violates the separation between intelligence and policy, I think those would constitute grounds.
But John Brennan can look at television. He can look at open source. And he certainly has testified in front of Congress.
Yeah, those are all things that a lot of people who have security clearances outside of administrations do. For me, the issue is whether he abused information that he obtained while he was director of CIA, or they may have obtained perhaps erroneously or incorrectly after he left.
Okay.
Now, you saw there that John Bolton did not really in any way explain a specific example of how John Brennan had revealed classified information. He said, well, he wouldn't have been in a position to draw the conclusions that he did draw. I think that's about how Trump, he concluded that Trump has engaged in collusion. But if you look at like the first clip of Rudy Giuliani I showed with Chuck Todd was talking about, well, the Trump Tower meeting itself, that's, at least evidence we should investigate something, although Rudy Giuliani apparently doesn't think so. But I think John Bolton didn't give a specific example of any sort of classified information that John Brennan had revealed, and at the same time he attacked him for politicizing intelligence, which if you watch John Bolton on Fox News during the entire Obama administration, never mind the Bush administration, he was like the worst offender of politicizing his status as having been a former insider and a recess appointment as UN ambassador. That was his claim to fame before becoming the national security advisor. And of course, as the national security advisor, if anyone should be able to name a violation of national security by John Brennan, it should be the national security advisor. And you just saw John Bolton was unable to do that. And I have one more clip on the John Brennan revocation of security clearance, but before I do that, I wanted to acknowledge the super chat contributions I've gotten so far, including a substantial one from Maher with no accompanying text message as to what prompted the contribution. So I appreciate that mute sign of support, and here are all my super chat contributions so far. I appreciate all those contributions, but especially that $100 contribution. That's great. That is I would say like 2/3 of the entire ad revenue and super chat contribution I made from YouTube last month. So just on its own. So that is a great incentive to continue to bring you these clips every Sunday and to try to make more edited, produced videos when I have something to say that the corporate media isn't saying. But I want to get on with the show here, and I have one more clip on the John Brennan national security clearance revocation. I showed the Fox News Sunday news summary earlier where Chris Wallace said, if Trump wanted to distract us from Omarosa, bringing up the whole John Brennan national security clearance revocation story was a good way to do it, but he didn't mention that the Washington Post just reported that was actually what was going on. And as I promised earlier, this is actually where Chris Wallace does mention that when he's talking to Republican Senator Ron Johnson, whose answer is less than satisfying after, which I will discuss with you after we watch that 2-minute 17-second penultimate clip or penultimate news clip, and then there's going to be a bonus Dash and Sandy clip at the end. But this is the second to last news clip that I will discuss with you after we watch together here.
Follow up specifically on that. You say you don't want it to be routine. There's a report in the Washington Post this weekend that President Trump wants to, and in fact, the White House has already drawn up documents to revoke the security clearances of some of those 9 other people on the list, and is in fact being advised to do so at specific times when there's bad, negative news coming out and to try to disrupt the news cycle. If he goes after some of those other 9 people on the list, are you going to support him or are you going to oppose that?
No, I don't want to see him politicize this. Listen, when you fire people from agencies, their clearances are yanked. But again, when people retire honorably, I think let them keep their securities clearances in place. And if you don't want to consult with them, just don't give them access to classified material. That's the best way of handling it. Just don't give them access to the material.
I just want to put up one more thing here, and that is the backlash, which really spread through the intelligence community and a lot of very senior officials. Let's start here. More than a dozen senior intel officials wrote this. It has nothing to do with who should and should not hold security clearances, and everything to do with an attempt to stifle free speech. Some 60 former CIA officers wrote this: the country will be weakened if there is a political litmus test applied before seasoned experts are allowed to share their views. And retired Admiral William McRaven, who led the Special Operations Command that killed bin Laden, wrote this: I would consider it an honor if you would revoke my security clearance as well, so I can add my name to the list of men and women who has spoken up against your presidency. I'm sure, Senator, you agree, an awful lot of people on this list, they go back to the Reagan administration. In the case of Bill Webster, they bleed red, white, and blue.
Absolutely. These are honorable Americans. I don't agree that President Trump is stifling free speech. I don't want to see an enemies list. And again, I'll just repeat, the best way of handling this in any administration, if you don't want to consult with somebody, you don't necessarily have to yank their security clearance. Just don't give them access to the classified material. It's pretty simple.
Senator Johnson, thank you. Thanks for joining us today. Always good to
So I guess those of us who bleed red, white, and blue don't want to have an enemies list. That at least we can agree on that. I don't know what bleeding red, white, and blue means. That seems a little bit over the top. And Ron Johnson had some talking points that he stuck to, and I kind of edited it down to the 2-minute, 17-second clip you saw there. But I did want to give Chris Wallace credit for at least bringing up the Washington Post story, as I mentioned before I showed the clip. And the final news clip I want to show before the Dash and Sandy interaction clip. This is actually Dash and Sandy outdoors in the sun, but that will be after the final news clip. And this is Kirsten Gillibrand, the senator from New York who may be running for president in 2020. And this is on CBS's Face the Nation, where Margaret Brennan wanted to bring up the way Trump was attacking women and had this whole panel where they talked to 5 women to find out what women were thinking, which, I don't know, that was kind of ridiculous, I thought. But the big criticism I have of this next clip is they never mentioned that what they're talking about in this next clip is this Trump tweet from December, I think I wrote it down as December 17th, but it's actually December 12th, 2017. Donald Trump says, lightweight Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, a total flunky for Chuck Schumer, and someone who would come to my office, quote, begging for campaign contributions not so long ago, open parentheses, and would do anything for them, close parentheses, is now in the ring fighting against Trump, very disloyal to Bill and crooked, used. I think crooked is crooked Hillary, but of course the really controversial part of this tweet from last December was the and would do anything for them, which was supposed to be sexually salacious. And whether or not you think it was, my criticism of the last news clip here is that Margaret Brennan of CBS's Face the Nation kept talking about what he said about campaign contributions and never really told the viewers the content of that tweet I just showed you in the 1-minute, 18-second clip we will watch together over here.
The president made that personal in a rally this week up in your home state of New York, and when he endorsed the candidate running against you, he also slammed you. You've been very tough on him, but he was tough on you and said that you basically had no accomplishments. He hit you for coming and asking and seeking campaign contributions in the past. How do you respond?
I think it was a very weak attack, and frankly, I was surprised it was the best he could do. But
President Trump does not have a relationship with the facts. And as a New Yorker, he certainly should know that I've passed the 9/11 health bill twice to give health care to our first responders and the families that live in the community. As the commander-in-chief, he should know that I led the charge in repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So if he wants to come campaign against me in New York anytime, he's welcome.
Did you hear some of his criticisms, like his hit at you for asking for campaign contributions, as gendered?
Yes, that was clearly a sexist smear, and it was intended specifically to silence me.
Why did you hear it that way?
And the dozens of women who had just come out against him for sexual assault and sexual harassment, and the millions of women who have been marching against him since he became president, because of what he said.
Well, this week, the president...
Because of what he said, Kirsten Gillibrand talking about the sexist smear, but for some reason she never said, and Margaret Brennan never said, that it was Donald Trump tweeting that she would like come begging and do anything for them, which is sort of like some weird sexual innuendo. But anyway, that's the final news clip. I hope you appreciated the work I put into picking out all these news clips and spending my Sunday and every Sunday for over 5 years picking out the best clips from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News. And I appreciate my live viewers, my recorded viewers, my Super Chat contributors, my Patreon patrons, and also the PayPal contributors, all of which you can do all those things at a link down in the video description. You can just give me a supportive comment. You can give me a thumbs up. That always helps to, I guess, make this video more viral, or I don't know how the YouTube algorithm works anymore. I think it's actually more important that you watch the whole video than you give it a thumbs up or comment, but I don't know. What do I know? But before I finish up the show, I did promise that I would do a Dash and Sandy outdoor interaction clip. This is from earlier in the week when I, Sandy's lying down right over there snoring. I don't know if you've heard her during my narrations here, but earlier in the week I happened to notice that Sandy and Dash were both out in the backyard one morning because they hadn't been fed and they were hungry. And here's 40 seconds showing basically this is the maximum amount that they interact. It's the Sandy Dash unicorn interaction clip over here. So that's it. That's the Sandy Dash interaction clip, and that's the final clip for the Sunday Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back next week and every week for the foreseeable future. Actually, 3 weeks from today, on September 9th, I may be delayed like 24 hours till September 10th. I'll explain that a little more in the next week or two. But I'll be saying that for the next couple weeks to warn you that the September 9th Sunday Clip Roundup may be delayed, but hopefully I'll make up for it with some edited, produced videos in the middle of the week, or maybe even a live stream sometime before the September 9th Sunday show, because that's the week when Brett Kavanaugh is going to have his hearings before the Senate Judiciary Committee to be Supreme Court Justice. But anyway, that's like 3 weeks in the future. I'll get to that more in the next couple weeks. Until then, I appreciate those of you who joined me for the live show, who support me in all the ways that I've talked about. You can support my YouTube channel that's been going on for almost a dozen years now, and I hope to keep it going. And until next week, or until I make my next edited, produced video, I guess I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.